Hi, everyone. This is the 6th episode of the podcast Eastern Queer of Belarus, where me, Viktia, and my co-host Ula are talking about queer history of Belarusian region.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's a bit sad because we're going to have a break and we don't know yet when we're going to return. But I'm still very, very excited about this episode because it actually works with the topic of performativity that I try to focus with my research, but has more artistic dimension. And it's about the theater, right?
Yes, the break which Ula was mentioning is about the fact that this is our 6th episode and this is the last episode in our self-proclaimed season 1. And we do hope to return, but for now, I think that we're gonna make a pause. And today's episode is gonna bring together, I feel, a lot of the topics we have already covered in the previous episodes. Of course, when we are talking about the performative practices and the LGBTQ plus theater in Belarus, we are going to talk about the idea of the infinite and fluid protest that just took different shapes and forms. And one of such forms is actually theater.
Before we're going to start, I wanted to address one thing that I received in comments and that I could even read out loud or give the other perspective, because we received a comment criticizing us of choosing English, reflecting that it's important to actually help the community to make up structures within. But for example, with Dmitry, his article is not translated to English, and the findings that are there are so big, right? That what you shared with me, the pictures, this is something that I never expected from a theater in the ideal Soviet state in USSR, meaning BSSR. I hope it's going to be translated at some sort and it's going to be more accessible to people in general. But for example, right now, we're not even able to talk to Dmitry because of English limitations. And we hope that this kind of work will connect those worlds.
Yes, thank you. And I think that this episode also is very intimate for me and for Ula because when we were discovering ourselves the topics of resistance and queer theater and culture in the late BSSR and early history of modern Belarus, we were so surprised with the fact that it was possible and people were doing this. And this is actually quite a sad sign for us. But anyway, with what I wanted to start is with giving a framework, because the specifics of any struggle for personal freedom and self-identification under the regime of oppression is that you automatically becoming involved in the protest and appear to be on this battleground, even if it is a bit against your will. And this is something that happens to LGBTQ plus art in Belarus. Either wanting this or not, the queer art becomes form of a protest to the regime also.
For me, one of the examples of Belarusian culture in the sense of something that is performed for people to see and where this identity could be shown is of a little later of one of the famous Belarusians, Boris Moiseyev, which is an icon of all, I would say, Russian-speaking post-Soviet community as a person who was wearing drag in 90s or was kissing and open about his sexuality, especially because at first it was a performance, a demonstration where you could play those different roles and imagine this mask that protects you. It's also, for me, it's kind of a sign that this kind of character was from Belarus.
Yes, I understand what you mean. this is hard to say if Boris Moiseev became actually a figure of protest. But I think that his actions, even being highly aestheticized and used for the quote-unquote art's sake, are so highly politicized in themselves then that he is becoming this part of the narrative of the struggle.
I'm saying this because for me, Soviet system was trying to cover so many aspects of people's lives, including aesthetics and culture, proclaim and show what is norm and what is not. So when aesthetically you're moving towards expressing not social battlefield and social fight and ground, but just aesthetics, just bodies, just love, and you aestheticize this kind of becomes form of resistance, not from you, but because of the push from the other side that is politicizing you, even though you try to be depoliticized.
Yes, and this actually fits the example of one of the first independent theater studios in late Soviet Minsk perfectly. I'm talking about the theater studio of Rit Talipov named on Victory Square, and it was one of the first who brought intimacy, homo and bi eroticism, and emphasized sensuality, boldness of naturalistic details on the scene just to the theater, because before that it was not common, it was not usual, and the language of the theater was very different. And I think that everything about this theater is absolutely a fascinating story, because Rit Talipov, his birth name was Florit. He was born in Bashkortostan, and in the late 1980s, he appeared to be in Minsk, and together with like-minded people, managed to obtain consent to unseal a bomb shelter on Lenin Street for a theater studio. And it was on the third level of the underground, so basically parallel to the metro. And the studio performed plays of famous avant-garde Polish author Tadeusz Różewicz, and Rit Talipov actually announced an open call for the actors for his theater, and there were queues of 2,000 people wanting to actually be part of it. And the fact that it was in the previous bomb shelter makes it so highly symbolical for me. It's just a wonderful example of how we can work with this Soviet and post-Soviet heritage, with those buildings which are not made specifically for artistic purposes, but you just reclaim these landscapes.
I have a question. Like you said that there was a different sensibility, and what was so different about the ways that plays were presented and played?
First of all, it was rather interesting that it played with the erotic aesthetics, namely placing the naked human bodies on the stage, which was actually absolutely unexpected on the stages of other official BSSR theaters at the time, because we're still talking about the Soviet period. And the fact that it just worked with experimental plays. Yeah, this theater was just not afraid to show naked human bodies. I think that this is already a huge step ahead. It's hard to say, actually, because I think that in Rit Talipov theater, there were not specifically mentioned the themes of LGBTQ plus community, but it just started to develop a language of erotics, the theater language for Belarusian performative arts.
What was the language other than eroticism and the spatial dimension that evaporated some kinds of more intimate relations between actors on the scene, the key aspects of it?
There's already the language of eroticism and sensuality, which would not exclude homoeroticism, is already a wonderful development, because even in the independent works, for example, in the theatrical arc by the director Evgeny Volobuyev, there was a play, a drama, Enigmatic Variations by Eric Emanuel Schmidt, about two men with different views on life and love. And it seems firstly that they are in love with the same woman, but in the final, the reader guesses the many years of secret love of one hero for the other. And actually, in the Belarusian version of performance, the director avoided the theme of same-sex love for fear that the audience would not be able to adequately understand the dramatic conflict. So I think that if at the same time there existed a theater which was not afraid that the audience would not understand something, and which was not afraid to play with different erotic concepts and was not exclusive per se, it is already, just as I said, a huge step forward and an amazing development.
So were there a possibility to kind of make a school out of this? Because as I understood, it created kind of a boom later. And a lot of people in general were excited to go to different studios in USSR, as I know. And am I right that this director also asked some people who were not actually professional actors, or am I messing something up?
Yeah, I think so. I think that he used not only the professional actors, and of course, in the independent history of Belarus, the amount of independent theatrical studios is immense. And I think that it is quite the time to talk about the queer dramaturgy itself, and how it was developing in Belarus. And I would start with one of the most famous, I think, examples, which is the drama named The God of Tickling, based on the play by Belarusian playwright Nikolai Rudkovsky, made in the independent theater Homo Cosmos in 2017. And in this play, there are postmodern, of course, it's 2017, interpretations of biblical subjects and classical European fairy tales. But in the center of the play, there is a photographer Ilya, and his long-awaited inspiration and hope for love, which becomes a young migrant worker from Central Asia whose hearing was damaged during military actions in his homeland, invents for himself a god of tickling because, quote-unquote, when it's ticklish, you want to leave. And Ilya calls his new friend Tim in memory of his recently deceased lover. I think that this play works already with of course, the theme of homosexual love and the theme of migration. So basically combining all of the contemporary problems of Belarusian society and centralizing them around this story about homosexual love. At the end of the play, there is a solo exhibition of Ilya, which does not bring him satisfaction. And during the last meeting, his lover asks him if he wants to go to heaven. And this question is not accidental, because then Tim kills Ilya, and that is how he gives him that heaven.
That's quite remarkable. Like the history of Belarusian queer and art and also migration. We kind of have a large history of people that are bringing LGBT context that are not from Belarus itself, but kind of keep the mark. And I'm just looking in what brought this imagery of Central Asian worker in the context of Belarus and what is shown through that. Of course, it's the depiction of marginalized person that is not able to have representation in society that kind of rhymes with queer people. But do you see that there could be something else in that?
Yes, I think that actually any theater is very attentive to the contemporary problems of the society, but it feels that in Belarusian context, the LGBTQ plus theater is as double attentive as any other type of the theater. And here I could also, for example, mention the play by the director Dudarev, which was called Dump, and it is about the raped recruit in the army. And of course, when we are talking about the topics of vulnerability and problems of the society, we should mention the documentary theater, which I think was quite fruitful in the Belarusian context also. And when it comes to the work with the queer topics and the other topics connected to loneliness, vulnerability in the society, any type of violence, etc. The Laboratory of Social Theater, for example, was created in 2017 on the basis of the concentration Contemporary Art and Theater of European College of Liberal Arts in Belarus. And we know this, actually, I think people from the Belarusian context would know the YeClub initiative. They had the documentary performance Dear People with a question mark, which was based on the interviews with victims of domestic violence who found later shelter in a refuge for women and children founded by the nonprofit organization Regislava. And the performance is perceived as a cross-section of Belarusian society in a transitional period where violence has become a habitual part of life and patience and suffering were proclaimed traits of the national mentality. And the last phrase actually is the quote of the researcher Dmitry Yermolovich-Dashchinsky, which I can completely agree with, because this is the problem, because I think in the early 2000s, there was a need to actually create the new form of the national identity after the fall of the Soviet Union. And with creating this national myth of Belarusians being so patient and so peaceful that they just actually enjoy suffering.
And this idea was traced long ago, Second World War, from Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and there was kind of this narrative belief that Belarusians were victim of history, always were raped, executed, displaced, and that's how we became who we are.
Yes, exactly. And this narrative is so tricky because literally, if you haven't been suffering, then you are not Belarusian enough. And I feel that this narrative is still present in the very contemporary culture. So if you were suffering as a queer person and you're complaining about it, then you're not a real Belarusian or something like this. And I should now proclaim a trigger warning, because I'm going to talk about the plot of one of the episodes from the Dear People play I was mentioning. So for the next minute, you can turn the sound off. The episode Now There Are Flowers tells the story of a young queer person named Pasha, who was raped by his father since childhood, but neither in the family nor at school did anyone believe the child. And Pasha had a toxic relationship with his friend, and in the state of alcohol intoxication, she actually asked him to use a bottle to carve the words "I am a whore" on his leg. But at the end of the play, he actually covers this scar with the tattoo of the flowers, which gives the new beginning to the character. And this is just absolutely horrible. And I cannot imagine how was it to work with this documentary material to make it possible to produce on stage. But I think that maybe this is how it works with the documentary theater. This is how it happens.
And I like in this play that actually the role of Pasha is played by Anastasia Stelmachova. And we really frequently see that men are playing women's roles as kind of a mocking, or this all of the context of a theater of playing someone else that you are not. And here, for me, it's done out of different kind of gesture by having this pain and acknowledgement of the suffering to be lived through the actor and presented from the role of Pasha. I feel like it's very interesting that it's played by a woman.
Yes, that is actually a very nice remark that you've made, because usually it is really vice versa. So it's cool. It's cool they added a woman. I think that also this is quite funny that we are all more or less, I think, in the Belarusian cultural community. We do know most of the theater plays we're mentioning. At least we have heard about them or about the initiatives. And sometimes these glimpses of new information from the Dmitri's research we were mentioning, they were so shocking for me, because I remember in 2019 I was at one of the performances of the Belarusian Free Theater, and I was actually very impressed by the shocking and very brutal work with the naked human body in the play, The Dogs of Europe. And now I start thinking that, wow, something like this actually has started developing in the late 80s. And this is crazy that actually this tradition is so long and have roots in the late Soviet history. And as we've started to talk about the Free Belarusian Theater, here we should mention one of its co-founders, Vladimir Shcherbany, and his theatrical works. I respect him so much, and I would start with 448 Psychosis play by Sarah Kane, which was directed by Vladimir Shcherbany. And this is actually one of my favorites play, and it is usually performed as a solo performance on the stage. But Vladimir Shcherbany actually added the other actors to underline that this is actually a lesbian conflict and the conflict within the lesbian relationship. Also, the Belarusian Free Theater now exists in exile in Europe. And they made another play, which was named Merry Christmas, Miss Meadows. And Dmitry Yermolov-Dashinsky names this performance as the first one about trans issues in the history of Belarusian theater. The performance is kind of like an anthology of world culture of transgender. And this is quite funny that before recording this podcast, I checked the critical review on it by the Edinburgh Review, I think, and it was called Too Many Issues, Not Enough Drama. And the critic who wrote the article finished it with the phrase, "The issues seem to obstruct theatrical creativity," which I think is not the case at all. This is just ridiculous. Shame on you, Edinburgh Review.
That's why we made this podcast, to finally reply to Edinburgh Review saying that you guys suck.
Exactly.
We're not those polite, nice Belarusians. It's the end of the season. If you made it so far, now you can hear what we actually think about Edinburgh Review.
Yes, and among other creations of Vladimir Shcherbany, I should name the play Left Dissidents. It is the performance about the lowest caste of Stalin's concentration camps, where men are forced into homosexual relations, and this actually, reflects reality. If you remember one of our previous episodes where we discussed this phenomenon with Ula, and this caste of men, which directly can be translated as cogs, they start to not only be just the documentary of the horrible reality, but also start to serve as a metaphor for the whole society, which I also find quite interesting for the queer theater to kind of expand its narrative. And of course, if we're talking about the individual figures in among Belarusian directors who worked with LGBTQ plus topics, I should also mention Yuri Divakov, which is one of my favorite directors also, because he is famous for his plays Oedipus, where actually the daughters of Oedipus, princesses Antigone and Ismene, are silent twin sisters, and at the same time they are romantic lesbians, and they are fascinated with each other, and they are actually ignoring the traditional morality. And for example, in the scene where Oedipus proclaims his incestual relationship with his mother, the sisters, dressed in pink, they fight with each other, but this like boxing episode ends with them kissing. And Divakov creates his theater, I think, with burlesque aesthetics, and also this is just the amazing rereading and interpretation of the classical plot about Oedipus, which is also not new for example, I think during the 20th century, there were a lot of rereadings of the classics, including the queer rereadings, but this is definitely the first example in the Belarusian context. Of course, I should mention also one of my favorite plays. It is called Reykjavík 74, and the original play was written by the Polish dramaturg who actually spotted the similarity between life in Iceland and life in Eastern Europe, which I also can admit the wittiness. And there, Yuri Divakov plays the central female role. The character usually experiences a lot of violence, and there are a lot of episodes of sexual ambiguity. So I would say that this play is as queer as possible. And I think that this is already a very highly qualitative work, not only in the context of LGBTQ plus history of the theater, but just a very experimental play, a very interesting to even to someone who is not connected to the topic directly, or do not want to be connected, or something like this.
I've never heard of anything like this, and I actually feel like we kind of have different generations that maybe they didn't know each other or didn't work with each other, but they kind of expanded the role that the theater could play in depicting life of queer people. For me, what all of those schools and all of those different creators lacked is the community, the sense of building infrastructures and structures in general in order to reproduce those patterns and those approaches to queer theater.
I do miss this kind of theater in Belarus also, and especially I wanted to mention one example of the play I watched recently in Reykjavík called Eden, and the music there was made by my friend, and so the play just worked with the themes of creation of the world, using the narrative of the Bible and of the Norse mythological texts simultaneously, and the only two main characters were women. One of them was disabled, and it was such a wonderful play. The music was amazing, the work with the character and just the approaching of the theme, it was so fresh and colorful and very experimental. And I hope to see something like this within the Belarusian community in the closest future.
Yes, that's a good final word. I would again say big thanks to Dmitry Yermolovich Dashinsky, that is doing a remarkable job writing texts about Belarusian queer culture and history in Polish and Russian and every possible way. We're very grateful. And yeah, I feel like we could sum up the season saying how important it was, what we have learned ourselves by that.
So how was this experience of working with the LGBTQ plus history of Belarus for you?
Awful. That's awful. Nothing could be worse than working with a history with no archives. When you had so much pain trying to find anything about medieval history, and I have to note that we actually planned the last episode to be about medieval history and how it was for Belarus, and maybe one day it will be released because I feel like Victor spent 30 hours on researching.
And yeah, this is true. This is so painful to acknowledge that, for example, some research just cannot be done. It is literally impossible, because we even addressed the woman who does the research primarily focusing on the history of sexuality in medieval Belarus. And yeah, she just said that there is not much information, and that is the problem. There is literally no information. So please, if you are an LGBTQ plus person, make sure to leave a trace after you, so the future generations will not be struggling with finding you in the history.
So we're waiting for 3 other different podcasts after this that are going to be exploring all of those topics in different languages and different focuses. So we are excited and want to share our excitement with you. Potentially, maybe we could make a next episode with guests and talk more with people that are doing their research. We'll see. Anything could happen. And I'm just very thankful for the help of An Ost, that they helped us to make that all possible. And to you, Victor, and to everyone else that listened to our episodes or contribute somehow.
I'm super happy with how it went anyway, because I just realized that for myself, I kind of put these chaotic and absolutely disorganized feelings and personal feelings and just the information from the out world somehow into the shelves in my brain, because of we were talking a lot about discourses and just how we can make the structure from this history. So that is why I am also very, very grateful for you, Ulo, because I think that was your idea in the first place. And for everyone who actually listened to us, thank you so much.
Yeah, probably no one has heard this
Listen
part.
at this.
But anyways, we had a great time. That was important.
Yes, I hope to hear you sometime soon. Bye.